make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, never been banned from Facebook or YouTube, never been sabotaged or censored for politely expressing a difference of opinion, ex-Muslim host Ina, keeping it non-controversial.
Welcome to episode 32. I'm here with journalist Cathy Young today, a pretty prominent voice in the anti-SJW scene, so this should be interesting. Hey, Cathy.
Hey, I'm glad we finally managed to get this going.
I know. It's been a tough one to schedule for some reason, but we're here now, so hooray. Okay, so it's interesting because now I think about 2 years ago, I was probably a lot more on board with the anti-SJW stuff, and totally that was like a big issue and ruining liberalism. But now I find myself on the other side because I feel there are much greater threats. And I also, I find myself thinking that among the anti-SJWs, which I probably view how you view SJWs,
right,
is, you're a very reasonable voice. You've come out and spoken against Milo. You have spoken against what Bill O'Reilly did, or you've shared articles not in support of Bill O'Reilly, which is great. So what are you finding these days with the anti-SJW scene?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm actually thinking of writing an article that would be tentatively titled something like, fighting political correctness in the age of Trump. I think it's funny that I think literally like the day before the election, I wrote a piece saying, if you're voting for Trump because you want to oppose political correctness, that's really not a good reason. And in fact, I think it will probably make the situation worse if he does get elected. And I think I was absolutely right, because I think one thing that we're finding is that a lot of people who are really not on board with some of extreme stuff that goes on, on college campuses especially, are now saying, well, do we really want to talk about, students being silly about safe spaces when we have, unauthorized immigrants who have been here for, 20 years and have 3 kids, suddenly being deported after, checking in for their regular appointment with the immigration. Yeah. So, and that sort of stuff. And
so what do you think of that? Do you think that's reasonable?
Well, I actually don't, because I think that it's possible to, walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah. I agree with that.
I think it is entirely possible and even desirable to be against, anti-liberal, really, things happening on both the right and the left. Because,
But you see that we can, people prioritize, right? So if that was your focus, like, say, 2 years ago, maybe your focus is a bit more Trump now.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely acceptable, insofar as I think there really are, bad things going on that are coming from the White House.
Some of this stuff does go too far, but then there's stuff on the other end that goes too far as well. And then when we get to like the safe space and the trigger warning, it's almost like the people opposing that stuff now require their own safe space and their own trigger warnings.
Of course. I mean, I think hypocrisy and double standards are, probably as old as humanity. So.
Right. So, like, Mike Cernovich, right? Who?
Oh my God, yeah.
Who's very prominent in the, rape accusations or false scene. But he was somewhere the other day, and there's a video of him, like, gently being, like, tapped or something. And he's like, I'm being assaulted. Whereas he's built a career on saying that women, falsely accuse people of rape. So I find that type of thing to be incredibly hypocritical.
Oh, of course. But, I don't think that we should, and again, that kind of probably goes for both SJWs and anti-SJWs.
Who've become SJWs now.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily fair to sort of, tar an entire, position with the brush of, the worst people espousing it. Because,
but that's exactly what happens on the left, right? Because I find that the worst, fringest, rad femme positions are used to...
Oh, sure. And you know what? I will say, I am happy to say that I actually spoke up against this even like a couple of years ago when it wasn't quite so obvious that, a lot of the stuff going on the sort of the in anti-SJW circles was bad,
Yeah.
But I remember that there were a few times when people would tweet a screenshot of some, things that some nutty feminist bloggers said that were clearly not reflective of, anything like, any kind of common or, let alone majority position, on the left or among feminists. Like there was this one thing going around, and I forget the blogger's name, but it was basically somebody saying that, all heterosexual penetration is rape.
My favorite one.
I think you can probably find like, a really, really, really small, subgroup of radical feminists who believe that.
Yeah.
But to pass that off as like, oh, look what the feminists are up to.
Yeah.
Well, they're actually not. And I think that,
but you're right, though. There's an authoritarian streak on the left, absolutely. And, I've been accused of being an MRA. I've been accused of being a rape apologist. And so, I find myself to be pretty vocally against these things. So if that's turned around and hurled at me, then obviously I think that's a problem, right? The reason I was called a rape apologist, let me tell you, is a funny story, is because there's a show called Naked Dating or something.
I haven't heard of it, but I will take your word for it.
So they set people up on blind dates. Okay. And they're naked.
Okay.
And so people, obviously, they sign a waiver. They're completely aware of what they're doing and that there'll be cameras everywhere. So this woman on this date decided that she would do that they would wrestle on the beach naked.
Oh, okay.
So I guess that they did not put that blurry spot each time as her anus moved around properly.
Okay.
So she wanted to watch this episode with her friends, and then she was really embarrassed and humiliated that her...
Jeez, you go on a naked dating show and then you're embarrassed because your friends saw body parts that you didn't want them to see. Okay.
Right. So then I said, okay, so then she sued the show. I forget the number. It was for $5 million or...
Ridiculous. Okay.
And then I did a Facebook post saying, come on, if you don't want, people to see your butthole, maybe just don't, wrestle naked in front of cameras for a TV show, and then try to get your friends together to watch it. That's all I said. And then someone was like, you're just like the people that tell women that they shouldn't, drink too much or that they're responsible for their own rape. So
Right.
I found that pretty ridiculous. So I understand that frustration. I'm with you on that, and I'm happy to criticize it. Same with, like, when that Shirtgate thing happened, I found that utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I'll tell you, by the way, one of the things that I would say when we talk about, does it really still make sense to, focus our energies on, railing at, silly far left college students, etc., when we have a lot of authoritarian stuff that's happening out of the White House. I think that it does, because I think that in many ways the two kind of mutually reinforce each other. I mean, I absolutely do think, and I really want to do more writing about that, because I think it is kind of being lost slightly in a lot of the, well, I won't say the dialogue, but it's really more like the mutual shouting. I don't know if you can call it dialogue.
Well, another reason why.
But I do think that one of the reasons, I absolutely do think that the backlash against, political correctness, for lack of a better word, it did play a role in Trump's election. I mean, I have personally talked to people who told me that that was the case for them. And, I talked to, I don't know if you saw the piece that I did for Foreign Policy on women who voted for Trump.
No, I didn't see that one.
A bunch of people. Yeah, I mean, it was actually quite fascinating. I mean, one of the women that I interviewed, and she didn't want her name used because she's still in college and she plans to go to grad school, and the atmosphere is such that she genuinely feels that she's going to be a pariah on campus, and her grad school prospects are going to be damaged if people know that she voted for Trump. But she basically said, the biggest reason that she voted for Trump was that she was really, really, fed up with all the far left ideological stuff on campus, and with these, ridiculous exercises where they, have you sit in a circle and confess your privilege. Or something.
Okay, that's silly stuff, right? But that's not driving me to vote for Trump. I find that a silly excuse as well.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't drive me to vote for Trump, but, I think that it's, it's obviously more than that, because there have been cases of, people losing their jobs for ridiculous reasons.
I wanted to talk to you about that. There's one specific case, actually, that you tweeted about that's been messing with my head a lot. So we'll get into that in a second.
Okay, sure. Anyway, yeah, let's move on. So I think
one thing I wanted to say before we end this topic is that it's not just that people say that we shouldn't, talk about silly college students doing this when Trump is doing this from the White House. It's also that the idea that these SJWs has extended over to kind of encompass the whole left. So people are put off by that. So that's why people are not interested in criticizing these SJWs, because now that whole umbrella has extended to include everyone.
And you know what? I mean, I've been called an SJW.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Sargon of Akkad, or however you pronounce that, has called me an SJW light or something. And I think the idea now, and I've been seeing this, I think this started about a year ago, or even more than that, with some of Milo's friends. The idea, I think, was that basically, if you support, if you oppose racism, and again, I don't mean the silly things that some people call racism, it's racist for, white women to have cornrows or whatever. And I think you can see how this is mutually reinforcing, because when these really stupid things get, pilloried as being racist, and, oh my God, Katy Perry wore a kimono on stage for a musical number, and, so I think people really do start taking the accusation of racism less seriously. And then you have And then you have people on the alt-right taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
And, basically saying, oh, you want to call me racist for saying that, blacks are dumb and criminal?
Yes.
Well, everybody gets called racist these days, so I don't really care.
Exactly.
Yeah, well,
exactly. That's the timeline. That's basically, it's become so diluted, and then people are in the alt-right are using those arguments as a cover for their actual racism, and then it's very hard to spot the real racism.
It's just the same thing.
But on the flip of that,
the concept,
is the social justice warriors. To call everyone a social justice warrior, or to call everyone a regressive,
of course.
It's been so overused that those terms have no meaning, whereas they used to maybe refer to a specific subset of people on the left.
Of course, yeah, exactly.
So now it's just a big mess where nothing makes sense anymore,
Yeah, nothing has any meaning. You can call anyone a racist or a misogynist. You can call anyone an SJW. Yeah. And, I kind of hesitate. At one point, I was kind of using the word SJW. And by the way, I do want to address, there is this myth that is now being kind of bandied about by some people on the left, that the word SJW came out of Gamergate or came out of sort of
Tumblr, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I first heard the term SJW when I was active in fandom, and it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I heard it from people who were people who were active in various fandoms and who were kind of fed up with, these annoying people who were running around telling everyone that everything is problematic,
Yeah.
And that, if you like a male character that someone decided is abusive, then you're a bad person who is upholding oppression, or God forbid you're interested in a heterosexual pairing for a character that, a lot of people decided is gay. So, if you don't think that Sherlock and John are in a romantic relationship, you're homophobic.
Right. These seem like really silly points. I'm not a gamer, so I'm not immersed in that culture. I don't quite understand.
This is actually more like TV fandom. I'm not a gamer.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but I mean, the reason that I could sort of relate to the gamers is that I did, I actually used to really love TV fandoms until they got really politicized. So, part of my support for Gamergate came from being really, really pissed off at these, obnoxious people on Tumblr who were, beating up on people who, had the wrong ideas about some TV show or other. So,
but you see that spun out of control now, so I don't know how we get back to just.
But it is very true. I mean, the term SJW did not arise from any sort of alt-right or even Gamergate circles. It came from, again, mostly people in various fandoms who were really annoyed at, these so-called activists who were trying to politicize every discussion of a TV show. Yeah. And I say so-called activists because, honestly, I don't think that. If your idea of being an activist is hanging out on My Little Pony forums, telling people that, this is not a politically correct opinion about My Little Pony, I don't think that's really being an activist.
Right. But this is what I'm saying. I'm totally with you on all that stuff, and I was all about that till about 2014 maybe, but now it just seems there's a lot of really sinister people focusing on that and ignoring what's coming from it. Yeah.
People
deliberately
taking advantage of the sort of the anti-PC backlash to promote their own really far right agenda.
Yeah.
And And I think, again, we're seeing this notion that if you're an SJW light, if you're for racial equality, or, if you think that, police brutality against minorities is a serious issue, or if you're, if you believe in equality for women, because, again, as with racism, we've seen, first I think the concept of misogyny was expanded to a ridiculous degree, where, we saw people accuse Matt Taylor, the scientist, shirt with...
and they made him cry. That made me very sad.
Yes, scantily clad women on them, and, suddenly that was like, oh, this is a misogynist shirt. So, when you trivialize the term misogyny to that extent, again, people will take advantage of that. And then you're seeing people who will say things like, oh, well, date rape doesn't really exist.
Right. Try raping a woman without force. It's not possible.
And I mean, Mike sort of has said some really creepy things, like, didn't he also say something like, the hotter sex is, the more it resembles rape or something like that? I mean, just like,
he's a great dude. Great dude.
Yeah. And again, I don't even know what percentage of the things that he and other people like him say are actually seriously believed in, and
the pickup artistry circles kind of really do believe that stuff.
No, I think that absolutely.
And we have, I don't know how familiar you are with Stéphane Molyneux. Do you know?
Oh my God, I am. Yeah.
Skeptic number one, being promoted by supposed rational people like Michael Shermer. Like, he called him the finest podcaster for Reason or something, like Stéphane Molyneux, who's like a race realist and thinks that Beauty and the Beast is offensive or something.
Yeah, because it encourages women to delay childbearing or something. No, and I mean, this guy, by the way, really is a misogynist.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually back in 2014, I was researching a piece that I actually never ended up writing, just because I got so busy with other stuff. I mean, I've always got 10 times more projects than I
know how that feels.
So I have the time to actually bring to fruition.
Yeah.
But I was working on this piece. Remember when the men's rights people were holding a conference in Detroit? I don't know if you've paid attention to it.
No, I don't think so.
But yeah, they did this men's rights conference, which, I mean, there were a couple of people speaking there who were okay, because, I mean, I think that there are people who are working on legitimate issues.
There's definitely legitimate issues.
Men's rights kind of, purview. I mean, I think that there are ridiculous cases with, people being forced to pay child support for kids that, DNA tests showed are not theirs. And then because there
But I feel it doesn't need a movement, really. I feel like we can focus on those issues.
No, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with a movement if it was, if it was not a crazy one, But a lot of the people at this conference were kind of nutty people,
surprise.
And that was when I was researching the things going on at that conference, I looked into some of the Molyneux stuff. And I mean, this is a guy who basically pretty much says that all the evil in the world is women's fault because women choose to mate with these. And it's
he also doesn't understand biology.
Yeah, I know. But it's also funny that his argument is that women are evil because they perpetuate the dominance of assholes by choosing to mate with assholes. But then he doesn't actually blame the assholes. He only blames the women.
And he also doesn't blame the women who he finds so horrible that the men are also choosing to sleep with. So it makes no sense.
No. I mean, this is when this is the point at which we really are talking about like actual, very literal misogyny. And I have seen quite a bit of it in these kind of far right circles that overlap with like anti-SJW. And I mean, I've gotten into arguments on Twitter a few times, but I mean, being in arguments on Twitter is really kind of the ultimate pointlessness.
Totally. Yeah. I tell myself every day.
I really try to avoid that, but I think that's actually kind of going to be the point of that article that I want to write about, fighting political correctness in the age of Trump. I do want to say, on the one hand, yes, I do think that this is important because, not only is it really obnoxious when you have, like people trying to impose their hang-ups and their, kind of ideological obsessions on everyone else on college campuses. But, we do have people losing their jobs for ridiculous reasons. We have, college students getting kicked out of college on really bizarre, accusations of sexual assault where, it's really pretty clear that it was kind of mutually drunk consensual sex. And then only the guy ends up being blamed for that, which I think really, if you think about, like, if you go back to the, real meaning of the word feminist, I think that's very anti-feminist.
Yeah. And I saw that play out. Like, I don't know how many of those cases on college are like that, but so I used to think it was like, oh, come on, these people are just making up. No one's going to accuse a guy for like drunk sex that was mutual. But then on a teeny bopper show that was coming on TV, I saw this episode of, this girl getting together with her ex, and then in the morning she's all happy about having sex with him, but then someone says, oh, well, if you don't really remember it, then then you can't have consented. But I'm like, the guy also doesn't remember it, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
So
yeah. No, I mean, I think that there are some very genuine sort of excesses, and I think they're not just harmlessly ridiculous. I think that there are very real people who've been hurt by them. I mean, there are stories that I followed this, and I really, really want to write about this because it hasn't gotten enough attention. There's a guy who used to write for, I think it was LA Metro, this website, named Art Tavanna, who writes about the pop music scene. He wrote a piece where, he was basically talking about, and oh my goodness, I'm completely blanking out on the name of the artist that he wrote about. But he was basically writing about the fact that sex appeal is really an important part of the image of a lot of musicians, which I think is very true, right?
Sure, but I mean, it's undeniable that they also sometimes cross over and I think make some very sexist music.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, he was writing about a female musician.
Okay.
And he was writing about like her sex appeal after she had done a nude album cover, and he sort of mentioned a few things about like her body in the album cover, which is again like if you don't want people talking about your body, don't.
There's a very sex negative. There's a sex-negative streak to this authoritarianism.
He talked about the fact. He also mentioned like male artists who for whom like sexuality and sex appeal was very much part of their image. So, like, suddenly he was the target of this huge witch hunt where people were saying, oh, my God, like, you sexualized this artist and, this is rape culture, blah, blah, blah. And, he discussed her body without her consent, et cetera, et cetera. And, like, he made it sound like the most important thing about her is what her body looks like, which he did not. I mean, if you look at that article, it was...
I'll have to see the article because I don't really know it again.
Anyway, so he found himself in a position where basically he really pretty much like his column was suspended, and he also lost, he told me at least, he lost a bunch of opportunities, like where he had articles lined up for various, pop culture magazines that suddenly canceled them because, so he basically lost like thousands of dollars because of this one piece that he wrote that some people felt, crossed the line.
Yeah.
And it was completely distorted in a lot of the criticisms.
I feel that personally too, because when I did my children's book, My Chacha is Gay, there was a campaign of people calling me Islamophobic and stuff just for sharing this cute little book about love and tolerance. And I was painted as this horrible bigot, and, the schools who were so interested in my book, backed away from wanting to use it in an official capacity. So,
and so I think we have this very real problem of people being kind of speech policed and being punished for saying things that violate someone's sense of, what is acceptable to say. So that's a real problem, and I think that we should oppose that. I mean, it hasn't, I don't think anything has changed in that regard.
But you know where that crosses the line for me is when people don't see any limits, right? So when Milo goes onto a campus and targets a single student.
Yes, that was going to be my next point. But my next point, I think that it's fine to oppose that. It's fine to be against that. But, first of all, I think that you really do have to be careful to, not cross the line into, as you said, attacking individuals, one thing. And also, I think you kind of have to be careful not to cross the line into legitimizing or, condoning actual racism, misogyny, homophobia, etc. I mean, it's one thing to say that, these people shouldn't be, chased off the campus with pitchforks.
Yeah.
Said something offensive. It's another thing to kind of legitimize what they said and, to embrace, the sexist, racist, anti-Muslim stereotypes. You look at somebody like Lauren Southern. I don't know if you're laughing. Yeah, because she started out as this sort of scrappy anti-SJW young woman who was, saying all these things that challenged the, prevailing dogma. And I mean, I don't know if you saw her book, but I mean,
I saw the cover of it. I think I recall.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, she's talking about, she's referring to immigrants as, the
barbarians or something.
Yeah, and the drugs of the third world or something. I mean, okay, but when you get to that point, it's really pretty clear that, you've kind of crossed.
But you see, that sounds so reasonable. This is not what the average free speech warrior, which is like the counterpart to the social justice warriors, they go to no end defending Milo from accusations of racism. It's not just his speech. Then it's no, he's not racist. No, he's not this. No, he's not this. And then Spencer, Richard Spencer also, don't misrepresent Richard Spencer, don't misrepresent Breitbart. It's wow. I saw Lauren Southern on the Rubin Report making this lovely distinction about how, leftists are so silly. They label everyone racist. And then she gives Richard Spencer as an example, saying, they even call him Richard Spencer, the white ethno-state promoting guy. So they're he's not a white supremacist. He's just a white nationalist.
Yes. Yeah, I love that distinction. I mean, that's real.
And then you talk about, the people on campuses that tell you to sit in a circle and, check your privilege or share your. So I've been a victim of a campaign where it's the literal oppression Olympics. I don't know if you saw it on Twitter at all, but it's you grew up in Saudi Arabia, but you had some.
I did see that. Yes.
Some access to some comfort, so you're not oppressed enough. So you only dabbled in oppression.
Yeah, no, that's ridiculous. From what I saw of that, I did absolutely think it was ridiculous. And
this is such an SJW tactics, supposedly, right? But it's totally used by NT.
I'll tell you that. I mean, if your struggle against the SJWs is leading you to, like try to explain why Richard Spencer isn't really a bad guy, I think you're kind of clearly on the wrong track.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
I think that's.
So tell me about Milo as a former, ally of Milo's. How did that kind of shift?
Well, I mean, I think it shifted over time, really. I mean, I got to know Milo because of Gamergate. I mean, we actually met in person at a Gamergate meetup in DC, the one that the first Gamergate event that got disrupted by a bomb threat. And, Milo, you've never met him, right? But
No.
I mean, you've seen him. I mean, he can be very charming in person.
Oh, definitely. I agree. He's charming. That's why he's so popular.
Yeah, he can be very funny. He's and I mean, I think he's perfected this act where, I don't know if you remember this. I came up with this phrase, Schrodinger's troll. Where it's kind of like, you're sort of both trolling and not trolling at the same time. So it's kind of like,
it's hard to tell, yeah.
None of this is really serious, but then maybe it kind of is.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going to say what I want, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is an act that really does give, people like Milo an excuse for saying, really nasty things about, women, racial minorities, Muslims, in ways that, if someone calls you on this, you can always say, oh, come on, obviously I was really just trying to piss off the SJWs.
Yes.
You're also appealing to a lot of people who really do seriously believe all these things like, women are stupid, and, patriarchy is right, and, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a way to get away with really bigoted stuff. There's no other way to describe it, really, without quite taking responsibility for it, because you can always laugh it off if someone says, wait a minute, the stuff you're saying is really horrible. I mean, I think that I remember that it started annoying me a while back, and really, I mean, the last straw for me was when Milo started praising the alt-right, because that was that was really a bridge too far.
Yeah. What about the pedophilia scandal, the promotion of sex abuse? Child sex abuse.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that probably Milo kind of was trying to be provocative, but who knows? I mean, he says this stuff, and it's funny.
There's a joke that he repeatedly made about his priest being the reason he's good at oral sex. Like, okay, I can see that as being some stupid, horribly wrong, trolling comment. But then he, in some of the other clips, he's like seriously talking about how the concept of consent is, problematic and authoritarian.
Right. And how, a lot of young, gay men who, when they're still boys, are kind of helped and discovered. Yeah.
So that stuff is really,
I think that's where it crosses the line. And I mean, when he was talking about attending Hollywood parties,
and he saw this stuff happening.
Very young boys, he didn't sound like he was joking, that time. And I know that at his press conference later, he kind of tried to explain it as,
I'm a victim.
Of gays. No, but he also said that when he said very young boys, he said, well, in the gay community, it's actually sort of very common to refer to young adult males as boys.
He talked about 13-year-olds specifically, though.
Yeah, exactly. And he did say very young boys. I mean, when you say very young boys,
Twice.
That really does not imply 20-year-olds to me. So, I mean, I can see how, people can refer to a 20-year-old as a boy or a kid. But again, when you say very young boys, that to me implies
And what's funny is that, the biggest charge against many Muslims is that, they have this prophet and they support this pedophile.
Oh, right. So,
it's the same people that are defending Milo that are hating Muslims for having, a prophet that liked children.
Right. Yeah, and I've actually always thought, I think that there are very legitimate critiques of Islam.
For sure.
Muhammad as a pedophile always really struck me as kind of needlessly kind of confrontational and silly because it's profoundly ahistorical. If you look at that era in human history, a lot of European kings were married to,
The thing is, though, that many people use that to justify it today, and he's supposed to be held up as a perfect example for all time.
Yeah, and I will tell you, by the way, something that I've always found really interesting, and to me it sort of illustrates productive versus unproductive approaches to, in this case, let's say reform, Islamic reform. I know that there are people in the Muslim scholarly community who have tried to argue, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but they've tried to argue that it's actually a misunderstanding that Aisha was 6 years old, right?
Yeah, they tried to say she was 18.
Yeah. And you see, people in the kind of anti-Islam polemicist circles, really, try to dispute that, foaming at the mouth, going, no, this is a lie. This is people being Islamic apologists, and now they're just trying to cover up the fact that, Muhammad was a pedophile. Okay, now here's the thing. Given that the young age of Aisha is actually used by some people to, justify child marriages today in the Islamic world, wouldn't you actually want to support, an effort by certain scholars within Islam to say, no, wait, you've got that wrong. She actually wasn't 6 years old, and therefore, we shouldn't be using this to excuse,
Yeah, I get both ends of that. So it frustrates me when people try to sanitize it and just lie about it, it was never homophobic or Islam was never misogynistic. Right. It was just misinterpreted. So that kind of stuff always annoys me. So it kind of falls under that. But you're right.
But it is a kind of double-edged sword because I think, that kind of sanitizing effort actually can, in some cases, lead to, religious reform. You also see people trying to, within the Christian tradition, you see people trying to argue that, the biblical verses about, killing men for the offense of, lying with another man. No, that wasn't really about gay sex. It was about prostitution or pagan rites. No, it wasn't really, but if it makes you happy to believe that it was, whatever.
Right. On the whole, I support those.
You're not actually advocating, killing gays or, putting them in prison or something.
Yeah. So we can support it, but if someone's going to get down into the nitty gritty and try to lie to me, then I'm going to point it out. But
of course.
Of course, there are people who, think everyone of Muslim background is taqiying, right? Just lying.
Yeah.
This leads us perfectly into my next topic for you is Robert Spencer. My goodness, what have you done to piss off the poor sweet man so much?
Right. Well, it's kind of actually a story that goes way back. It goes back to 2007, I think.
Yeah.
I started paying attention to this so-called anti-jihadist blogosphere. And in the beginning, I didn't really know about it. I did assume that it was directed at, extremism, terrorism, etc. And when I started looking at some of those blogs, I just realized that there was this really genuinely bigoted tone, not just toward radical Islam or even, fundamentalist Islam or even Islam in general, but toward all Muslims, essentially. Mm-hmm. There was this...
which he denies, furiously.
Yeah, of course, but I think you really just kind of have to look at his blog, and I did at the time. I was actually blogging pretty regularly on my own blog, and I kind of compiled some examples that I thought were really telling. I mean, there was one point when this mysterious Hugh Fitzgerald, this person who co-blogs with him, who apparently I thought at one point that it was just another pseudonym for Robert Spencer himself, but apparently he is a separate person. Anyway, yeah, he had this post that basically said that any Muslim living in the West, like if he hasn't openly renounced Islam, even if he's completely secular, he's still dangerous because, he could always revert to, radical Islam, or if he doesn't, then his children might. And then actually I'm thinking, the logic behind that is so ridiculous, because even if he actually has denounced Islam, how does that guarantee that his kids will not actually, come back to Islam with a vengeance?
Right. It could be literally anyone.
Blot out their father's shame or something because, he's an apostate who's denounced Islam. So, I mean, it just really doesn't make any sense whatsoever in whichever way you slice it. And, I just thought that was such a ridiculous and kind of openly bigoted argument. Also, just these blogs, not just Bob Spencer's, but Pam Geller, I think, was beginning to blog at that time, and there was a bunch of others. They were promoting this incredible paranoia where it's like anything that anyone with a Muslim name did that was criminal, even if it had no terrorist connection whatsoever, it was immediately branded as jihad. I remember that at one point there was a story where some guy who had I don't know if he was a practicing Muslim or not, but I mean, the guy was running a meth lab out of his home that he accidentally blew up or something.
So they said it was like a meth jihad?
Yeah, meth jihad. And there was all this stuff on these anti-jihad blogs that was like, oh, this is more lone wolf terrorism. And there was also, I actually remember now what initially drew my attention to this. There was an incident in Oklahoma where this guy who, by all appearances had really nothing to do with Muslims or Islam, his name was, I think, Joel Hinrichs. He was not of either Arab or Pakistani or whatever origin. He came from a Christian family. He committed suicide on I believe it was the Oklahoma State University campus in a rather sort of unusual way, which is basically that he blew himself up with a bomb.
Oh wow!
Yeah. It's not common, but he had a bomb in his knapsack, and he set it off. He left some kind of note, the contents of which were never disclosed. And he did this not very far from a stadium during a football game. So suddenly there were all these rumors that started to circulate that he had tried to get inside the stadium with his backpack and was denied entry, which, by the way, he did not show up on any security cameras. There was a story that he, was actually a Muslim convert and a jihadist who had planned a terrorist attack. I mean, the evidence for him being a Muslim was along the lines of, oh, well, he had a Pakistani roommate. Okay,
Well,
with 5 blocks of a mosque. Okay, well,
that could be anyone. Yeah.
So did a lot of other people in the area, obviously. So yeah, and it was just I wrote a column about it at the time I was writing for the Boston Globe, and it was this completely ridiculous thing, which I could only imagine how horrible it must have been for the young man's family, which was already going through a really, really horrible time, with their son and brother or whatever. were, committing suicide in this really, really grisly way.
So was it reported anywhere else as any credible source as a Islam-related?
Eventually the Wall Street Journal did a piece about the rumors because, these rumors on the blogs started to circulate in a way that you really had to pay attention to eventually. And, the FBI completely denied that, this had any sort of terrorist connection. But of course, the kind of the party line on these blogs as, oh, well, of course, the FBI is just covering things up, because they are soft on jihad and, they don't want to offend the Muslims and so on. So it's like, there was this very intense push to say that this is a cover-up. Michelle Malkin was also pushing this. I think she even wrote about it in her syndicated column. So it kind of went a little bit beyond the blogs. But that was really my first exposure, I think, to this anti-jihadist blogosphere. And then I actually don't think that... And
anti-jihadist is a bit of a misnomer, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, Robert Spencer actually didn't write about that case, I think. There was another case that he was kind of flogging at the time, which is fairly close to where I live. There was a Coptic family in Jersey City that was murdered. And it was, again, another really tragic, horrible case where a whole family was murdered in their house. And a bunch of bloggers, including, I'm pretty sure Bob Spencer was on that, started claiming that this was basically done by radical Muslims and that it was being covered up by the police in Jersey City because, again, they wanted to cover up the extent of, Muslim terrorism.
Everything is a conspiracy with Robert.
The past, right. And eventually, of course, and I think it was like the speculation was based on the fact that the police took a while to complete the investigation, which, sometimes will happen. And very often, as I'm sure they will be very tight-lipped about, the leads that they're following because they don't want to, alert the suspects to the fact that, they may be onto them. Mm. And I think that's what was going on in this case. Eventually, they did announce that they found the killers, and it was a robbery, a break-in that took this tragic turn of this whole family being slaughtered, and it's horrible, mm-hmm. But it didn't have any kind of terrorist or religion-related connection. They were not targeted because they were Coptic Christians. And again, there was this incredible amount of scaremongering. And, I looked at this and I thought, wow, this is this whole segment of the blogosphere that is, promoting these really irresponsible rumors and kind of targeting Muslims as a group and promoting this, paranoia about Muslims. Because, what I thought after 9/11, and I actually wrote about it at the time. I mean, I thought it was really remarkable and incredibly commendable for the United States and kind of something to be proud of that, by and large, except for a few sort of isolated attacks, there was no targeting of Muslims. And, if you compare this to, the internment of Japanese Americans, for instance, I mean, in this instance, we had, George W. Bush at the time and Rudy Giuliani, whatever one may think about him now. And, but at the time, he actually took a really strong stance, saying, Muslims who live in our midst are not the enemy.
I look back at some of the stuff now, and it seems like, in comparison to Trump, like, wow.
No, yeah, I know. Yeah, so at the time, all these leaders were basically saying, we're not going to target, peaceful Muslims. And I thought that was just this great sign of the progress that we've made since World War II, morally. That, even though we were attacked by people from this group, we're not going to say, oh, you as a group are evil and, suspect.
Yeah, I mean, there were people saying that. that, but the leaders weren't.
Sure, yeah. And I do think that, to some extent.
But that's why Robert Spencer doesn't like Bush, right?
Maybe. So that's how Robert Spencer first came to my attention. And I wrote something on my blog criticizing him, and then we kind of went a few rounds of back and forth. And, I think he actually invited me to debate him on his own blog, and then I looked at some of the commenters there, and I said, you know what, I mean, I really don't think that this is something I want to do. I'll be happy to, exchange, like back and forth posts on our respective blogs, but, I really don't feel like, venturing into that particular environment.
Right. Well, he's really upset with you. When I had him on my show, I was just asking him about some stuff that you wrote, because I thought it was a good article and it pointed to some real issues. And he was hostile from the start. Like that article you mentioned that's written by his co-blogger that says that you basically can't trust any Muslim, even secular. I brought that up, and first he started laughing that, oh, yeah, you don't even have anything by me, even though I had talked about many things by him up to that point.
Right.
And then he went on to basically endorse what it said.
Okay.
Well, he was just like, well, yeah, anyone can. I don't remember the exact words of the conversation, but he certainly didn't say, oh, yeah, that's not right or anything. So...
Yeah, no, that's the funny thing. And, again, I don't really, right now have, Robert Spencer's writings at my fingertips. But, yeah, he has certainly said things that, more than imply that, all Muslims are to be viewed as suspect. And, of course, if you look at Pam Geller, she's completely out of control.
Who he thinks is great, yeah.
Yeah. So, the fact that he thinks she's great, she's written things like, and I think, by the way, he has this really vehement hostility that he has toward me now, I think is partly based on the articles that I've written about Pam Geller, because I think before that, he was always kind of sniping at me and calling me a useful idiot, but I think it's kind of gone to a whole new level. So, yeah, Pam Geller does things like, one thing I found that was just bizarre. She made a post on her blog about vehicular jihad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, people using their cars to commit terrorism. And this is, of course, basically anyone she can find with a Muslim-sounding name who's involved in any kind of motor vehicle accident.
Robert also was all fine with that on my podcast episode as well. And I'm
right.
Bewildered by this.
Just we're talking about this really out of control paranoia. And one example that was especially egregious, she gave the example of someone who she, flagged as a vehicular jihadist.
Any Muslim having a car accident, for anyone listening, is a vehicular jihadist.
This is a guy whose car slammed into the wall of a supermarket.
He had a heart attack, though, right?
He died himself. This must have been a really incredibly incompetent jihadist, because the only person that he actually succeeded in killing was himself.
Wasn't there a case where it turned out to be a practicing doctor who just happened to have a heart attack?
And it turned out that actually he had a heart attack behind the wheel. And so really, it's just, this really tragic case that she decided to use for as her political fodder. And the thing that was really disgraceful was that when she found out, when the news came that it was a heart attack, she didn't actually post an update and apologize. She just scrubbed the item from her blog.
That's so wrong.
And it still remained. I still came across it. That item still remained in a couple of aggregate, there are blogs that will aggregate posts from various other blogs, and it stayed in a couple of those. And of course, they don't look at the updates. So, this false information that she did not update still remained out there. And, I remember that when I pointed this out, I think Bob and Pam did this response to me together, and they basically tried to argue that, just simply removing the post that turned out to be inaccurate really was the standards of good journalism. And no, actually, when you post false information, you don't just try to scrub it from existence. You actually post an update saying, I was wrong about this. There's been a lot of debate about how correct Robert Spencer is in his interpretations of, various aspects of the Quran. I have no idea. I'm not a scholar in the Quran. I mean, quite honestly, Robert Spencer probably knows it better than I do. So, I will grant him that.
But the thing is, he projects that onto every Muslim. His issue with any Muslim politician taking the oath on the Quran is ridiculous because, other holy scriptures are full of violent stuff as well.
The Bible says you should kill gays. And of course, with both the Bible and I'm sure the Quran, there are ways in which, liberal Christians and Jews kind of, try to dance around
delude themselves
intolerant things that are found in those scriptures. And I'm sure that, there are reformist Muslims who can and do the same thing with the Quran. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that, I really find it kind of ridiculous when some people, and I'm pretty sure Robert Spencer is among them, will say things like, these people who are trying to pretend that the Quran is not extreme and that it can be reconciled with, reformist Muslim, reformist Islam, they're just being hypocritical, etc. Well, again, you can level the same accusation at liberal Christians and Jews because...
Well, yeah. What's the end goal here is what I always wonder. What do they want, right? Yeah. If you want to lessen the extremism, you should be okay with people kind of who ignore parts of the Quran or who don't live by it word to word. Just that's good.
Oh, absolutely.
Instead of holding everyone to a literalist interpretation, you can't do that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And I think, I'm really glad, by the way, to see Ayaan Hirsi Ali kind of go in the direction of encouraging reformist Islam because, she's an atheist herself and she has said some pretty harsh things about Islam. But, I think that's a really good direction she's going in. It really, if you look at what Spencer and Pam Geller have done, they've repeatedly sort of disparaged reformist Muslims.
People who are accused of being horrible Islamophobes themselves, like Majid Nawaz.
Exactly. So,
Robert Spencer said he acts like an Islamist or something. It was just absurd. He doesn't like Irshad Manji, anyone. Everyone he has issues with. He has issues with me. I'm not even Muslim.
Chasser, whom even Fox News loves, he's their sort of resident Muslim. And, he's gotten viciously attacked by Pam Geller and Bob Spencer. So, it just really doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, I think we also have people doing this sort of Muslim bashing just for publicity,
It's a hot selling topic these days.
Yeah, and, like Milo bathing in a, tub of pig's blood or whatever as performance art.
Milo is such an idiot.
Speaking of Milo, we completely forgot to mention, and, speaking of Milo and performance art, we forgot to mention this $12 million investment, I guess, that he's got.
Right. How horrifying is that?
And it's like, and I'm thinking, this is money that actually could have been used to promote, intelligent discussion, which we really need right now, because I really do think that that political correctness and the stifling of discourse in the name of these left-wing sensibilities and identity politics is a real problem. But instead of having actual intelligent and free discussion, what are we going to get? We're going to get Milo promoting the sort of I don't even know what to call it. I mean, he basically says that he'll be like making the lives of
feminists and journalists and BLM activists,
and, Black Lives Matter people, etc., a living hell or something like that. I mean, that's just really,
that sounds useful. Yeah, just what we need.
Yeah, so it's just going to really continue this cycle of madness, I guess.
Of polarization too, right? Like, so when they push more and more extreme people like Milo, then, the people on the left who people find extreme are also the loudest, right? So then this polarization increases and increases and increases, and that's what's happening.
Yeah, so I think it's just going to be more trolling, and it's very depressing, really.
It really is, but and I wish people on my side, the left, I wish they would resort to coming up with intelligent, creative ways to sort of troll Milo back if he's being put in the public sphere, rather than screaming and giving him exactly what he wants, right? Like after a certain point, though, as we discussed, he has targeted individuals. It should be, only responsible behavior that people like him shouldn't be invited onto campuses, I believe firmly. Once he's crossed that line, why are we inviting speakers that put students at risk? But had he not crossed that line, then I think that creatively trolling him is a better tactic.
I think that's very true. I do think that he has kind of crossed the line in that sense. I would agree with that. I assume that I don't know, are the people who are inviting him even trying to get him to commit to not attacking any individual students? Because it would seem to me that at the very least should be a requirement.
Yeah. But we don't really know.
So I don't know what's going on there. I think responsibility is really kind of sorely lacking on all sides. In the case of the debate about Islam, I think it's really, really sad that it's been released, that it's been reduced to this polarization where it's either all Muslims are evil, unless you've converted and or become an anti-Muslim atheist and openly denounce Islam. It's either that or we have the kind of the opposite extreme of a lot of people on the left, a lot of liberals, essentially arguing that, extremism is really no greater a problem in Islam than it is in any other religion. Well,
believe me, it's so frustrating to be caught in the middle of this.
You can make that argument with regard to, certain periods in history. Sure. I think it is kind of ridiculous when, again, Robert Spencer tries to, rebut the really very, well-founded scholarly consensus that in the Middle Ages, for instance, it was better to be a Jew living in a Muslim country than a Christian one. There is a reason that, when Jews got kicked out of a number of European countries, they went to places like Egypt.
Robert just gets really petty, though. He's tried to, say, the shape of, domes is stolen from so-and-so, and it's not, Islam came after.
Right?
That's not even his point. He just wants to, discredit anything Islamic. It just seems really pointless. Yes, Islam is a newer religion, so obviously it will have borrowed, I'll even say plagiarized things from other religions.
Oh, of course, but I think again, that's kind of, I'm joking about cultural appropriation, but it's really kind of the same principle. I mean, cultures and religions develop partly by kind of exchanging intellectual content and so on. I mean, if you look at the structure of Christian churches, they borrowed a lot from Roman temples.
Yeah.
And, people build and borrow what has come before them. And I mean, Christianity, as it developed in medieval Europe, borrowed all sorts of things from paganism. So, yeah, of course.
So what's happened now is that this critique of Islam versus hatred of Muslims, it's become such a hindrance, right? So people like Tommy Robinson, Robert Spencer, they may say they're not anti-Muslim, and Milo too, but they very clearly say a lot of stuff that can be perceived as being anti-Muslim.
Yeah, well, I think not just can be perceived, but really.
Right.
I think, Milo especially, because of course Milo is a performer, but Milo will say things like, well, we've just got to admit that you can either have the freedom and, gay liberation and women's emancipation in your countries, or you can have Muslims.
But he doesn't like those things either.
Well, that's it's kind of ironic that there's a number of people who really only seem to like feminism when
it's for Saudi women.
Use it as a stick to beat Muslims with, basically,
or Western feminists with.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I know that you've addressed this, I think, on your blog, and I've definitely seen you talk about it, this whole issue of people on the right essentially saying, you Western feminists are preoccupied with these completely ridiculous petty things when the real issues for women are basically like out there in the Muslim world, where women are, forced into burqas and, subjected to genital mutilation and, stoned for adultery and so on and so forth. And, I'm probably somewhat more sympathetic to this argument than you are, but at the same time, I can definitely see how it can certainly be taken to really bizarre and ridiculous extremes.
Like you saw the rape one, ones, right?
Yeah, there was this ridiculous tweet where, what was it? Remind me. It was something like, stop talking about your rape or something?
It was like, one person said, stop talking about your rape privilege, or I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something about Western women will always have privilege, and being raped doesn't change that because Saudi women have it worse. The other one was like a tweet to a woman who was saying that, if you think all Western women have it so good, I'm one of these women in the West who was raped and stalked by her rapist. And the response was, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but at least you weren't forced to marry your rapist or stoned to death.
Right. Well, I will tell you one thing, and I mean, you may disagree with me. Okay, but I think that, first of all, of course, it's absolutely horrible and unacceptable and, just really boneheaded to use that kind of argument to, invalidate someone's suffering, or, to sort of be dismissive about it, or to suggest that, that they should console themselves by saying that, people in other countries have it worse. That said, I mean, I think that, how shall I put it? I mean, I don't think that even like perfect equality would be a guarantee against, bad things happening to people.
Of course, yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think that the fact of a woman being stalked and raped necessarily like per se invalidates the idea that whether or not we can argue about to what extent women actually have full equality in the West. But I mean, to say that, well, women aren't really equal in the West because I was raped and stalked by my rapist, I don't think that is really quite that argument doesn't.
No, I don't think that's the argument. There's a lot of legislation and stuff that people were arguing about.
If you can say, well, I was raped and, the rapist went free because, the jury decided that I provoked it by wearing, sexy clothes, then we're talking about something altogether different. And I mean, I think that, there's a lot of, I will say that when I read your blog post, listing the issues that you think kind of the legitimate issues that feminists have in the West, I did sort of disagree with a number of them because I felt that a lot of these weren't really necessarily gender issues per se. People being attacked, and I've written about this. I mean, there's been
so let me just ask. Do you consider yourself an anti-feminist?
No. Well, okay. Let's backtrack a little bit. Because, I mean, I've been described as everything from a feminist to an anti-feminist, and something in between. I don't like the term anti-feminist. I mean, I've seen people use it who make arguments that are somewhat similar to mine. But the reason I don't like it is that, feminism does have the dictionary definition of, believing in the equality of men and women, right? And now, I certainly think that, given that a lot of feminists, in the West, a lot of feminists in, the United States today, I think are advocating for something else. In some cases are, in my view, just really openly promoting hostility to men as a group. I mean, I think it's certainly possible to say, and I've seen, very smart, intelligent people say, well, I do not consider myself a feminist because, I don't think feminism in its current form, represents those things that I believe in. And I think the argument that I've also seen of, basically saying, well, how can you not call yourself a feminist when, feminism really just means the equality of men and women. So, if you believe in that, you should call yourself a feminist. Well, I think it's really every person's business.
Exactly. Can't force labels onto people.
And I mean, if someone believes that, the label has been discredited by a lot of the people who use it, and they're going to say, well, because of that, I'm not going to use it anymore, I think that's totally their right. On the other hand, I will say that when you use the word anti-feminist, I think because of that dictionary definition, to a lot of people, that means you're against equality. And I think there is that sort of confusion of terms. And I think...
but there are people who self-identify as anti-feminist, and there are also people who are anti-equality.
Oh, of course, yeah. And I was going to say that. It's very confusing because, I mean, I have seen people... even people have this in their profiles where they will say, anti-feminist, gender egalitarian. Okay, that's going to be confusing to many people, but I mean, I think that if that's the way they want to identify, fine.
I'm just not impressed by that when I see that.
I think I've seen some people use the term non-feminist, which I think is a little less confusing. But the thing is also that I think a lot of the time, like when people use the term anti-feminist or when they, bash feminism, a lot of the time I think it does attract, a following of people who are against equality, who are genuinely misogynistic. So I think that because of that, I don't really like the sort of the anti-feminist label. I mean, I've sometimes used the term dissident feminist.
Okay.
And, I also see the argument. I do believe that there are, legitimate, men's issues and ways in which, ways in which I do believe that men are sort of on the receiving end of gender bias.
Right. So, okay. So when it comes to men's issues,
the argument that, if you use the word feminist, it's sort of because of the root of that word in, femina, it automatically sort of seems to imply that you stand for women's rights only. And then, of course, you get into all these confusing arguments like, this has even been going on among feminists themselves, where you have some people using feminist in the equality sense and some people using feminist in the sort of pro-woman sense.
It sort of seems like an all lives matterification if you do the gender egalitarian thing to me. So, like, I'm definitely not anti-men. I find them fine. They're great. They're normal people just like me. Some of them are awful. Some of them are good. But I'm very for women's rights specifically, like concentrating on women's rights. And that's why I call myself a feminist, and I get irritated when people think egalitarian is a good substitute, because to me that's like saying all lives matter. So do you see that argument a little bit, or? I see it. And I don't even really want to get into the whole Black Lives Matter issue because I think that's really more of a response to a kind of very specific argument that, blacks are disproportionately killed. And I think that it's kind of a different, for me, like there's a real difference in the sense between, between the situation of women and the situation of African Americans, because, I'm not drawing a parallel. I'm just
I think the disadvantaged position of African Americans is really just so much more, indisputable in many ways on all sorts of, measures of, whether it's economic, whether it's,
that's a whole separate conversation. I'm not trying to draw a parallel between race and gender. I'm just saying.
But, I think it's a little different in the case of women, because I think there is a more kind of feasible case to be made that in some areas, women are the ones who have, I kind of hate the word privilege at this point, but I think, for instance, women actually are much less likely than men to experience police brutality when they do get arrested. And, women generally get, for instance, shorter sentences than men in criminal court, even when.
Sure, there might be some areas, but I think this is where the core of our disagreements are, is I generally do think that we're still not at a place where women are equal, and perhaps you think that we are more so than I do. So that's a core disagreement. And so that's why you won't find my, list of feminist concerns and, legislations and sentences and whatever probably to your liking. So I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree on that, because we're probably going to then argue endlessly.
I'm sure that we could probably at some point, debate some of those specific things. I think that there are certainly legitimate issues. I think the attacks on abortion rights, for instance, are definitely a big cause for concern. Is it an attack by men on women? Not necessarily. A lot of the most kind of the most radical people in the pro-life movement are women. And I mean, if we actually had a Congress that was majority female,
but we don't, right? So
that
they don't. So it's always the men. Men are usually making the decisions for the laws. So I mean, there was like a picture of all these American old white men on a table making decisions about women's reproductive health. And it just reminded me so much of, obviously there's no moral equality between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. That's not what I'm saying.
Was that the picture of Trump meeting with the congressional leaders about the health deal, the healthcare deal or something?
I think so.
I think that wasn't really about abortion so much as it was the Freedom Caucus that, didn't like the current bill, and which happens to be all male. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is certainly in some of the state legislatures, if you look at some of the people who've been leading the charge on anti-abortion legislation, some of those have been women. So I mean,
some have, but
in Washington, the Republican leadership right now is pretty male.
Right, so we can go endlessly in circles about this. That's what I'm saying, right? So we're not going to come to an agreement.
Yeah, but my point is, we could elect, Sarah Palin and, or Michelle Bachmann, and we could elect, 300 more of them to Congress.
We could, but we haven't, right?
Yeah.
We haven't. Yeah.
So, I mean, eventually that will probably happen. I mean, there are a lot of...
Eventually, then we can have this conversation. But speaking about about how, how you mentioned earlier about how this social justice stuff leads to people losing their jobs for silly things. Right. And feminism, I think, is a good lead up to this. Is you tweeted this article about this. I think it was a developer who lost his job over some kink, sex thing, this subculture that I had never heard of. So you really that,
I've heard about it.
It really messed with my head, right? Because there was two conflicting parts of me. Like, I'm very sex positive, very kink positive, BDSM positive.
Yeah, and this is a very male-dominated kind of, men are the masters and women.
Right. So it's literal, like it's a literal culture, like a subculture where they talk about very gendered sexual slavery, right?
Right. Although he claims that it isn't necessarily, and that there are people in the subculture who are into that, and there are people who aren't.
So the subculture is called.
I do know that the books that it's based on really are very much into sort of the idea of innate male dominance. So, it
was like a system of natural order from what I could tell from reading it, right? So I'm coming into it as a completely clueless pair of eyes. I was just reading up on whatever I could find. It didn't have an agenda. In fact, I was conflicted myself. So I was just trying to understand it. And it's called the Gorian subculture, based on a bunch of books.
GOR is, I think, the name of the world in which these books take place. So that's that's also the name of the subculture. And I forget the name of the guy who writes these, but yeah, I mean it's seen as very, to use one of my least favorite words at the moment, problematic. That's a perfectly good word, by the way, that has been completely ruined by the social justice crowd.
You're not the first person I've heard say that.
Appropriate, but yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting case because, I mean, I think a lot of us would probably do have some, moral, issues with that subculture, and we kind of, we may view it with a certain amount of distaste. On the other hand, it seems to me that as long as the guy doesn't bring it into his professional interactions. And, he claims, and I've never seen, I think, anyone really rebut that. He claims that he has always been, perfectly respectful and egalitarian in his interactions with women professionally. And, given that, I don't really see how and why he should be subject to to professional retaliation.
Okay, but suppose like you truly believe that women should be sexual slaves, right? And you keep it out of the workplace. I don't know, the extent of that he did that is also not clear, so I'm not sure if he let...
Yeah, I think his argument is that he's never, certainly no one has ever produced, any writings by him that advocate, that argue that, the only place that women have in life is to be sexual slaves. I think I think he has argued in his defense that it's basically like people who are involved in that subculture, and and many of the women who are involved in it, that's kind of a part of their lives. They may be perfectly independent professional women in other aspects of their lives.
Yeah, so this is what bothers me about it, right? Like I have known professional dominatrixes, and even the reverse. I've had no issue with it when it doesn't sort of come with this gendered thing. So I've known people who engage in that kind of a hardcore BDSM kink and play and have a master and slave relationship, but it's not gendered, right? So this is one difference. And I think from what I've read is that it goes beyond, the ideology goes beyond the bedroom, right? So that's another difference.
Right.
This isn't some fetish party in the back room where you're walking a girl in a dog collar. This is a bit more than that. It seems to extend into your life philosophy. And so suppose someone wanted to start a subculture based on ISIS role play, right?
Right.
And if you just truly believe that women were sexual slaves or Yazidis were sexual slaves, and what if your boss discovered that, is that not a fair thing to fire you for? Even if it's just...
Again, I would have to know the specific details of of what was going on there and, what the subculture was like. The way that he describes it sounds like it's something that, really should not be, sort of a permanent black mark against you in terms of employment.
But he's obviously going to describe it like that.
Now, I don't, in a way, we don't really even know enough of what was being alleged. People, it's kind of I guess it also depends on how seriously you take this role play. If somebody was, let's say, involved in some sort of, Nazi role play in, the context of World War II reenactments or something, that would be one thing. On the other hand, if you were involved in some sort of subculture that actually did espouse
Nazi ideology. Yeah,
I can see how that could be, definitely held against you. But it's complicated because. If you think about it, there are, for instance, traditional religions that also espouse the notion of female obedience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Are we going to say that anyone who follows those religions should be unemployable?
So if you're following this slavery, the slavery part,
right,
then that's extreme, right? So say you're a Muslim, but you truly believe in the parts of scripture that talk about slavery and sexual slavery, and you're discovered talking about that and espousing that elsewhere.
Certainly if you're actually holding slaves in your basement, that's, I think that's
no, not even slaves. You don't have to have slaves. Well, in some of these cultures, there are like, opt-in slaves, right? So right. Some people might have slaves in their basement, but they're willing.
Kidding thing. I mean, that a lot, in our society, like anything that goes on, of that sort is consensual. And yeah, I mean, it's a really, really fine line, because on the one hand, I do believe in freedom of association. And I do believe that, if you, as let's say, as an employer, or as a professional association, if you want to reject people who espouse certain ideas that you consider to be deeply offensive, I think, in a way, I would argue that you certainly have that right. I mean, again, I guess my question is, how far do we go with that?
I mean, I was actually speaking to an HR person about this because it really messed with my head so much. So I have a friend in HR, and I called him up and talked to him about it. And, he was telling me about how people have been fired for like Ashley Madison and using, say, like company email, company phones, to contact mistresses and things, like set up dates with sex workers. So if that can happen, then I think an ideology based on only female enslavement sexually is a bit more intense.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in a way, I would agree with you, but I guess it's a question of, are we talking about people doing things completely on their private time, or are you talking about things that actually do implicate the employer? Because I think that's the line that a lot of people
so if, like, say, company email was used or company phone was used, would you then consider this case to be more fair? Like, again, we don't have all the details, so it very well could be.
I think certainly. I mean, that would certainly give the company more of a right to consider this in deciding whether to associate with this person in the future. Or for instance, if, let's say, this guy was using professional conferences to recruit women into this lifestyle, and there was actual evidence that.
But then you see, recruitment is also up for debate. What's recruitment? Is he just getting to know them there? Is he just initiating them with the secret handshake, or is it more than that?
You could, in those circumstances, I think you could see how the company would say, well, wait a minute, if he is at this company, if he is at this conference as our representative, then we don't really want him to, be engaged in that kind of lifestyle, on our time, so to speak. I think there are a lot of complicated issues there, but at the same time, just given the climate that we currently have, I'm very concerned about, how far does this argument eventually extend? What lifestyles and what personal preferences do we eventually decide are grounds for?
Sure. I can understand that.
Are we eventually going to say, well, you can't work for us if you belong to a church that doesn't accept same-sex marriage? That's, is that the road we're going down eventually?
Yeah.
And I think that, there's been a lot of talk about the extent to which sort of out of control political correctness brings on the opposite, the sort of Trumpian backlash. And I do think it's a real thing. I think that there's a sense in which, as much as I support the sort of social liberation movements that promote individual freedom, as opposed to sort of submission to traditional strictures on personal behavior that are, a part of many religions. I do worry that there is a danger of sort of making the public square, so to speak, so hostile to traditional ideas that you're going to find a kind of growing polarization and splintering, where you're going to see a lot of religious people kind of withdraw into pockets of society that are really like pretty isolated from mainstream culture, if you see what I mean. Because if that starts happening, I think that one danger is that we're going to see like increasingly like ultra-conservative and even reactionary ideas kind of prevail.
We're seeing that, aren't we, though?
Communities, yeah, and I think we're already seeing that. But I think there is a real danger there because, like, if more and more like religious people start pulling away from mainstream culture, there's going to be a kind of self-radicalization. Because
so, what do you recommend to that? Like, isn't it a good thing that, we are going towards social liberation and not adhering to these traditional ideas, but then you're saying it alienates the more traditional, and then that's a backlash.
It's a very fine balance. I mean, I think that we need to find a way to kind of maximize the freedom of the individual, while at the same time sort of not sending the message that, oh, well, if you do believe in these more traditional ideas, we completely despise you and everything you stand for. And, we're going to make it really difficult for you to, practice your beliefs openly. And I think it's a very fine balance. I mean, it
is. I mean, I am firmly of the belief that traditional ideas and regressive traditional ideas should be mocked and ridiculed. Like, coming from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, I have no problem mocking conservative traditional ideas, but that will probably alienate this religious minority. So I don't know what the solution is.
Again, I mean, it's a really fine balance. It's a matter of deciding, well, who are the people that we don't really care about alienating? Because, if someone already believes that, like gays should be jailed or gays should sort of stay completely in the closet. And if someone believes that, women belong in the home, then, there's probably not much we can do to kind of bring them into modernity.
Well, you see, we're seeing such growth in, in desire for these types of ideas. Like there's Professor Jordan Peterson. He talks about disliking casual sex a lot,
but see, this is where I think we can sort of negotiate certain, this is where I think the dialogue can take place. I mean, I think there are a lot of fairly liberal people who dislike casual sex and who
sure, but they're not trying to.
So this is where I would say, let's not kind of go. I mean, there's a difference between, for instance, someone who says, oh, well, if you have premarital sex, especially if you're a woman, you should be forever branded a slut and, excluded from polite society and so on.
There's a difference in disliking it for yourself.
Between that and saying that, we should talk about how, maybe casual sex isn't good for people. I think that's some of the rhetoric. And I know I'm kind of opening up a can of worms when we don't even have a lot of time to, to go through that can of worms. But, I think some of the more extreme rhetoric coming out of the transgender movement has been kind of counterproductive.
Oh, yeah, this is a whole other podcast in itself.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast in itself. But, I think for a lot of people, like if you come out and say, well, like any person who says they're a woman, should be able to enter a women's bathroom, even if they, have a beard and, basically look like a guy. I think that's the point at which you're going to start, alienating a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, I haven't seen anyone that's like looking like a bearded lumberjack or mullah or something trying to get into a woman's washroom. Like usually it's a pretty
I haven't seen it in person, but I mean,
legit people that
point you to at least one person online.
I just think that these are exaggerated claims by the right. But anyways, this is a whole other.
I think and I mean, Jordan Peterson is a kind of interesting figure because I strongly disagree with some of the things he says, but I mean, I also think that the way he's been treated is really kind of disgraceful. I mean, I don't think he's preaching hate toward anyone, at least as far as I can see. Anyhow, so it's. I mean, I think that we're gonna. We're going to have to be a little more nuanced, I think.
For sure, but I think that some of that can be directed at the Jordan Petersons of the world, right? He's not very nuanced himself.
He's not very, no. And I mean, I think it's definitely a kind of mutual. I mean, I think right now what we're seeing is kind of a mutual polarization. Mm-hmm. And I think one unfortunate thing that happens, I mean, I've been sort of following the whole Jordan Peterson debate, and I've noticed that he's been talking to a lot of podcasters who are sort of, on the more or less on the alt-right side.
Yeah, one of them is an advocate of violence towards non-white people in the ethno-state, Tara McCarthy. Her podcast
I don't know anything about her. I mean, I don't really know that much about her.
She hosts this podcast.
I mean, Jordan Peterson kind of strikes me as someone who's a little naive and not very well versed in like the media. So I'm kind of assuming that a lot of the time, like he probably gets an invitation to go on a podcast, and he comes across as someone who's like incredibly anxious to get his message out.
Yeah, but if you take one look at Tara McCarthy's Twitter, it's all about white genocide, being upset about mixed race babies.
I know. I mean,
so she's not really the best candidate to go and speak about the Western civilization with, because to me, he loses all credibility. And then when he, talks about postmodernists sort of inventing words, and then he cannot stick to a definition of the word truth, and then he speaks in all this Deepak Chopra flowery language that means nothing. To me, he's kind of like the mirror image of what he's criticizing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I mean, I like I said, I followed some of the things that he's been doing, and I was really disappointed when I saw him, talking to some of these sort of more kind of dodgy podcasters.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there is, unfortunately, a tendency, because of the polarization right now, there's a tendency for people to kind of gravitate toward extremes. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, again, it's because they're sort of alienated by, like Jordan Peterson, I think, has been so demonized by a lot of the mainstream.
Yeah, but he says so much stupid stuff. Like,
but I mean, I think, he's not the best spokesperson for his point of view. But I think some people really are being pushed, I think, toward the extremes. I
just feel that people won't use this excuse for, say people being pushed to Islamic extremes. Why use it for...
Oh, yeah. No, and I think there is a really ironic kind of parallel that people aren't really noticing. Like, I've seen a lot of people on the right really mock the idea that, Muslim bashing could radicalize some Muslims, and they're going to say, oh, well, what does that say about Muslims if they react to being criticized by, embracing these murderous cults? And then the same people will turn around and say, oh, well, there's all these, young men joining, white supremacist groups. What do you expect when there's all this white male bashing going on?
Yeah.
And well, isn't that the same thing? Because, what does that say about white males?
Right. They can so easily be radicalized.
Male bashing by, joining white supremacist groups. I think that there's definitely, everyone has a double standard. Almost everyone.
So if we can find a small group of people, influential people, starting to speak without double standards and kind of applying these.
I would love to see that. And I mean, I honestly think, and, I don't know who would do this, but I would love to see some sort of a group of, people who want to sort of pursue and defend sort of authentically liberal values, not liberal in the kind of the American political sense of conservative versus liberal, but, in the sense of, defending individual freedom.
Please don't say classical liberalism. Because
defending individual freedom.
That term has been really dragged through the mud. I mean, people think of like alt-right now when they hear classical liberal.
Yeah, which is also very unfortunate. I mean, it's there are so many words that have gotten hijacked by both the right and the left. But I would love to, as I said, I would love to see a kind of coalition of reasonable conservatives, moderates, liberals, everyone really, who would defend these core principles of, individual freedom, of, judging people as individuals and not on the basis of their, gender, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, whatever, and that would apply equally to the sort of the more extreme identity politics and the more traditionalist kinds of, race and gender-based kind of stereotyping that I think we're also seeing. I mean, again, I think that this is something that is very, very sorely needed right now.
Yeah, and if we're, going to criticize people being demonized for, views that aren't so popular, and then we're going to try and get a professor fired who, tweeted about, I want white genocide for Christmas. It's the same people. So do you know who I'm talking about? Like,
yeah. No, I followed that story.
Yeah. So it's absurd to me because the critics of the people who, the critics of the leftists who will say try to get Milo deplatformed or whatever, are the ones who are trying to get this professor fired also for saying white genocide, which isn't a real genocide.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he's a jerk. I mean, I think...
Yeah, sure, that's different, but...
Yeah, of course. But then again, so is Milo, of course.
Well, bigger, I'd argue.
It's really pretty obvious, he was making a bad joke. Yeah. I mean, I don't really think for a moment that he was authentically, calling for the mass murder of white people.
Isn't he white?
Yeah, he's white. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, the guy was making a really bad joke. He was being a jerk.
Yeah.
And of course, you're seeing some of the same people who are otherwise, very gung-ho for freedom of expression, saying that somebody should lose their job over this. And I mean, the right, apart from this, really does not necessarily have a great history of defending freedom of speech on campus. I mean, there were, in the beginning, of the war in Iraq, where immediately after 9/11, when the war in Afghanistan began, there was a number of instances of conservatives calling for professors to be fired for criticizing the war, or not criticizing the war per se, but saying something that they considered to be offensive to the troops, or saying things that they considered to be sort of disrespectful to the victims of 9/11. So yeah, there's certainly, again, there's a lot of hypocrisy across the board, and there's a great book, this wonderful guy, Nat Hentoff, who I have a number of disagreements with, but he was this really, really strong advocate for free speech, and he wrote a wonderful book called Free Speech from Me but Not for Thee. And that kind of sums up, I think, the attitude that
Just to make one point, though, before we start wrapping things up, is I think that, I don't know if you're going to agree on this or not, but people make this equivalence that, now that the anti-social justice warrior people have gone so far down the hole, they've become sort of social justice warriors themselves, and then there's this moral equivalence being made of like the extreme anti-SJWs and the extreme SJWs, which I disagree with, because if you go into the extremes, I think that the people opposing social justice end up at the, misogyny and white genocide kind of place. Whereas even if the extreme social justice, they start off from a place of wanting social justice, even if they end up at saying, fuck all white people and do not have mixed race relationships, which is absurd. But
right. Although, I mean, you can really see the kind of what some people call the horseshoe theory, where, they really do converge in, for instance, being opposed to interracial relations.
Right. Sometimes they do converge. But what I'm saying is the moral equivalence isn't accurate, because one side actually starts off from a point of wanting justice and wanting to uplift people that are disadvantaged. That's their intent. Whether they carry it out or not, whether they turn into racists against other races, that's a different point. But then the other end of that is people who want to stop that from happening. So,
although, to play the devil's advocate, when you get to the point where people will justify the, bad treatment of someone on the basis of their race and sometimes their gender, I think you've really pretty much ended up in the same place as the far right.
Sure. My only thing is,
started out from a better place.
My only thing is that that's exaggerated. I find that there's some cases here and there, and then people take it and then they roll with it as if that is the ultimate goal of the left. Well,
no, but see, that's the thing. It may not be the ultimate goal, but if that's what you're justifying in practice, I mean, if you're justifying...
But not many people are.
It's really not an isolated case. I mean, I've seen a lot of these cases by now where people just get horribly treated, and then there's, the response basically is, white tears, or, male tears.
Well, sometimes that's just like a trolling response to trolling attitude. It's not always malicious.
It is a real advocacy for, not showing compassion to someone who is, in a really bad, position because they're white, and especially if they're also male. I've seen that a lot.
You see the
mentality. When you get into that mentality, that's bigotry, that's...
I get it.
I don't really care if it started out from a progressive place.
I'm on board with that. I just think that...
So I think in that sense, it may kind of pose a special danger because, again, these progressive ideas really do appeal to many people who would never be drawn to overt bigotry. But, if you tell them that this is in the name of social justice, I think a lot of them do get drawn in, and I think that's a bad thing. I think it ultimately undermines, liberalism again in the kind of classical sense of freeing the individual and treating people as human beings. I think there is that kind of moral gradation, but ultimately, I still think that both of these phenomena are... You
think it balances out in a certain way?
In a certain way, it balances out. Yeah, I think you see what I mean, right? Because on the one hand, I think...
I see what you mean. I don't...
It does have that moral edge because it doesn't start out with an explicitly
maintaining superiority.
Ideology, but by the same token, I think that moral edge kind of gives it that little kind of dangerous extra of being able to appeal to good people. So, that's my view.
I agree that it does have that attached to it, where it has that moral appeal and can lead people to that direction. But I just think that perhaps you worry about that more than I do, because I believe that most people won't get there through that progressive mentality. So I think that's the difference I want to highlight.
I would like to be as optimistic as you are. I mean, I also don't think that many people are going to be drawn to the really like hardcore far right. But
I think is just changing in front of our eyes. I was in total agreement with you maybe until like a year and a half ago, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening around us? These things are being normalized. I have some serious concerns about that. I mean, I think that there's again, I would sort of argue for nuance in terms of like when we look at Trump supporters, for instance, not all Trump supporters are racist.
Argue that most Trump supporters are really not they're not down with the really like hardcore racist stuff that's being promoted by the alt-right. But I mean, I think it is important to make those distinctions.
But they did, kind of look the other way on a lot of the racist stuff that Donald Trump was saying, a lot of the sexual predator stuff that came out about him. I'm not.
I mean, I think I think it's really human nature to look the other way at things when we think that, well, at the moment, like whatever we're supporting happens to be the right thing. And you kind of look the other way at.
Sure. Yeah. I don't see myself excusing that kind of thing ever. But, nuance is good. I don't think Trump voters are. Trump voters are not all racist. However, I think they did look the other way on some racism. So I'm not for treating them with like sort of these kid gloves either. But I'm of course not for treating them.
And I mean, I'm very willing to to confront and criticize whoever is condoning racists. I absolutely agree that it's a problem. I mean, I think that as I've written, I think I gave Milo a pass at one point and some of the really unsavory stuff that he was doing. And, I think that, and I'm looking at some of the stuff that's happened to some of the people that, I at one point was in contact with, like Lauren Southern, for instance. I mean, I think it's a real danger. I think a lot of people are being drawn into some very, very questionable things.
Yeah, well, even people that I, on social media that I knew that I used to respect completely 2 years ago are now full-time, apologists for Milo or, tiptoeing around Richard Spencer, can't fully condemn Tommy Robinson. These are red flags to me. These are intelligent people that I thought were liberal up till 2 years ago, and now they're not able to, denounce the most obvious things.
Right. I think there are two possibilities. I think some of them eventually will kind of decide that they have enough. They've had enough of, condoning.
But what's their threshold? If their threshold is really that high,
I think eventually. I think the human mind really has an amazing capacity for denial. So, a lot of the time, I think people will kind of look at what their purported allies are doing and kind of, not see it really. And eventually I think there does come a moment when they have to confront it. And, then they will either disassociate themselves or some of them.
I feel like that moment
kind of go all the way in.
That moment was like a year ago. But people have different.
This election, I think this election has sort of driven everyone nuts.
For sure, and it's exposed a lot of people, unfortunately. But I
think, here's the thing. Given what's happened over the past year, I cannot make any kind of predictions anymore.
Yeah.
And, I really have no idea what the intellectual landscape will look like a year from now. I honestly don't know, because
so true.
Because, as with the political landscape, really anything could happen. And, I can tell you with a reasonable degree of certainty that, I'm not going to join Milo's traveling circus.
Good. Glad to hear it.
The $12 million. But, other than that, I think everything is really up in the air.
Yeah. So right. One last point I wanted to make was our sort of difference on feminism, I think, and the whole rape thing. I think I wanted to clarify that I'm with you when it comes to people that are, distinctly and clearly trying to change definitions of rape. And I do think that happens. There are some people that are trying to change it to mean, I don't know, like any
sexual experience that you later decided you didn't like. Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like that too is something that's exaggerated on the right. I mean, you might disagree as well, and feel free to. But I think that's the difference. So there are some people who will not acknowledge this at all. I accept that has happened a couple of times. I've seen it happen, and that's not...
Oh, I think it's happened.
Right. I'm not saying literally too, but I think that this now is being used to discredit people who are also like victims of rape when they're drunk. So it's also a fine line to walk.
That's necessarily true. I mean, if you look at, like, there was, for instance, when, I don't know if you remember the case that unfolded in Steubenville in Ohio, like back in 2013. I mean, that was the story that really kind of started this whole this current kind of wave of attention to, to acquaintance rape and to kind of, what some people call rape culture, where this extremely drunk teenage girl was sexually assaulted at a party by two football players. And, I don't remember that there was really anyone in the mainstream conservative community who said anything like, oh, well, it's really her fault for getting drunk out of her mind at a party. I mean, there were people saying, like, we should be able to hold rapists accountable, but, it really should be okay to also tell young women that, it's not a particularly smart idea to, get so drunk at a party that you literally the next day have no idea what was going on. And, but
that's not really the place of the media, right? That's like your family and friends who care for you, who know you, like the media condemning the girl rather than focusing on the guys assaulting her. I think that's the problem.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, I don't think anyone focused on condemning the girl. I mean, I think that there were, I think what happened was that there were a few people, including, I can't remember if it was Serena or Venus Williams, but it was one of the Williams sisters who made a very kind of mild comment about, what those guys did was horrible, but, I think that we should also be able as a society to kind of send a message to to teenage girls that they need to be kind of more responsible in terms of, like getting extremely drunk at parties. And she was kind of immediately jumped on for victim blaming and, was basically kind of browbeaten into apologizing. And I thought that was kind of silly. But there was a CNN reporter who was just torn to pieces because she made a comment about, when she was watching the sentencing, she made a comment about the sort of really emotional moment of the young men's families reacting and, these young men kind of feeling that their lives are over. And a lot of people said, oh, well, this is like there's all this sympathy for the rapists, and she didn't say anything about the victim. And in fact, she did, and people her comments were posted literally with the end of her comments cut off, where she said, of course, we have to remember that this is an extremely serious crime, and there is also this victim whose life has also been, changed forever. So I think there was literally some misinformation where comments were taken out of context. And I mean, it's really not that uncommon for people, whatever the crime is, to express a certain degree of sympathy for, perpetrators who are teenagers and who themselves may not necessarily know what they were doing in many ways. I mean, it's not, people do that when they're talking about teenage murderers, I actually looked for it at the time, and I found a number of examples where people were kind of, semi-sympathetic to teenagers who killed someone, and, basically saying kind of the same thing, that, it's really kind of tragic to see this person who's only, 16 years old, and their whole life is messed up, and,
I don't understand the sympathy, though.
So I said it's really, to say that, again, we're going to treat rape as this kind of sacred cow almost, where, these human instincts that apply in all sorts of other cases, like expressing a certain degree of sympathy for, a teenage perpetrator who, maybe was severely intoxicated when he did what he did. I think that's counterproductive. That's really almost like saying, in a way, to me, that really, in a way, is kind of like going back to putting women on a pedestal. But anyway, I don't think anyone is really calling for blaming women. I think it's more of, unless you look at these really extreme, subcultures like some of the, people in the so-called manosphere. I think that's definitely true. But, I think that there's an attempt to talk about some of the more complicated cases where, it's not necessarily... there's a whole debate about, what does incapacitated mean? Are you actually...
yeah.
Well, but see, that's the thing. That's the thing, though. If you look at the way that to the average person, I think incapacitated basically means that, you're either unconscious or, like the victim in Steubenville, you're sort of so severely disoriented that you literally have, practically no awareness of what's going on, and you're not really able to walk, in that case, these guys were kind of just dragging her around like a bag of bones, basically. It was really, really disturbing. But you're also seeing, especially in some of the conversation that goes on college campuses, you can actually see it on websites, on college websites where they discuss, sexual assault. They will actually use the word incapacitated in a very different meaning.
Like what?
Basically, where your judgment is impaired. I have seen... pages on, web pages on...
but if your judgment is impaired and the other person's judgment is not, if you're really drunk and someone isn't drunk and they're taking advantage of you, then that's, in my mind, definitely non-consensual sex.
What does impaired? Well, first of all, how do you know that the other person's judgment is not impaired? In most of these cases, we're talking about two people who are drunk.
Right. So that when that is proven,
incapacitated, that is basically something like They will use things like, let's say, if the person is behaving in an uncharacteristic way, like they're being really giggly and talkative, or like they're.
But that could be very, very drunk, right? So what I'm saying is that I'm with you when it's provable. Just 1 second, just let me finish.
Yeah,
when it's provable that they're both just drunk college kids that are having sex or whatever, then I'm with you if someone tries to change the definition of that.
Right.
But when it gets into, now we're starting to question, what does incapacitated mean, and let's be suspicious, and it's
but that's exactly. But I mean, I think that is an attempt to change the definition, because incapacitated generally does not mean impaired judgment. It means that you're literally like not physically capable.
Yeah, you're not. Yes. No, I get that.
I mean, here's my definition. If you're able to text your friend and say, "Oh, haha, I'm about to get laid," you're not incapacitated. I'm sorry. I don't really care how impaired your judgment is. I don't really care that you would not have done this when you were sober. I mean, I'm going to be completely honest and say that, over the course of my life, I've had, on a few occasions, I've had sex with guys when I was drunk.
No.
I was sober. I mean, come on.
No. Okay. So here's the thing. It depends on both parties, right? If you're drunk and texting and accepting, but the other person is not, that's a problem. I've been in situations in college where guys are careful because they are not drunk. You know what I mean? Like, I've been at parties and you see there are many like respectful guys that are like, no, you're drunk right now or whatever, I'm
also kind of concerned. I mean, are we saying that we should kind of expect men to protect women from their own bad judgment?
No, but I'd say the same if there was a guy very drunk and a woman was trying to get with him, but he was really drunk. So I would say that she's in the position, if she's not drunk, to be the responsible person and wait until he's not drunk. So do you get what I'm saying?
Well, you know what?
This isn't just women.
What I would say. I mean, I would say that you're right, sort of from a moral standpoint. I'm really not down with saying that is something that we should reclassify as rape. And I think this is this is one of my concerns about a lot of this. I mean, I think that it's perfectly possible for people to, behave badly in sexual situations without necessarily doing something criminal. I mean, I think that even if you, leave aside the question of someone being drunk, let's say that you, have sex with someone who is at that moment very upset about something and, very emotional and, not really thinking straight because of that. I mean, that's probably not like, especially if you kind of suspect that, this person would not have had sex with you if they were not in that emotional state.
But they have their faculties, right? So that's what I'm saying is, let me clarify if this is right. You think that having a one-party drunk, very drunk sex isn't necessarily taking advantage of them sexually?
Well, okay, this is where, again, taking advantage sexually, I mean, in a legal sense or a moral sense, because I can tell you that the definition of rape, the legal definition of rape in most states, I'm pretty sure, is that you have to be drunk, like, to a point where your faculties are so impaired that you cannot do normal things. Like, I'll give you a specific example. Like, there was a case at Ohio University in which a woman and a man, both students, were kind of making out on the street, and then basically she sat down on the ledge of the window of a bank and he performed oral sex on her in public. And, this was at 2:00 in the morning. And of course, there were some passersby and, some people started taking pictures. And of course, the next day, a video of this ends up on the internet, of course. And then this girl, who has no memory of any of this, by the way, goes to the cops and says, and basically says, I was raped. Because, I was too drunk to consent to this. And
the other person's not drunk?
No, he was drunk.
He was drunk.
Yeah, he was also drunk.
Oh, yeah, this is a messed up situation.
He had no memory of any of this either. So, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And, the thing is that, first of all, when they reviewed the video, they actually found that, when the crowd started gathering, the guy said, maybe we should stop. And then the girl actually said, no, go on. So, she actually verbally encouraged him. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, that obviously, if she had all of her faculties in place, she would not have probably, been okay with this. But the other thing, and this case actually did go to a grand jury, and they decided that there was no cause to indict the guy. And part of the reasoning apparently was that there was a security tape showing that after this happened, the girl walked away unassisted and went on to, buy a burrito or something. They both stopped at a cafe and she bought a burrito. Mm-hmm. And I remember that when this was in the when this was written up, when the story was in the news, there were people in the feminist community who were extremely upset about this and who were saying so basically they're saying that if you bought a burrito, somehow that means you weren't raped. That's ridiculous. Well, of course that, that's not the logic. I mean, the logic is that if the charge of rape depends solely on you not
having your faculties
in place, and you are, in sufficient possession of your faculties to walk unassisted and buy a burrito, then you are also in a position to say no to sex if you, so desire. So I think, of course, would that be more complicated if the guy was completely sober?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. But, I'm not even sure, actually, because I'm thinking right now, I'm not really sure what the law is. Would the legal perspective on this have been different if he had been completely sober? Probably not, actually.
Really? Because then he has power over her. She's not fully there, and he is. Right now, he says he's drunk, she's drunk. They both don't remember.
I should ask some of my lawyer friends, because I actually think that it doesn't change the intoxication of the accused. I think actually doesn't necessarily change his or her responsibility.
Any lawyers out there listening, feel free to let us know.
Difference. Morally, this makes a huge amount of difference. But, I think it is kind of an interesting conversation about, if we're taking the discussion of rape kind of away from, physical force, do we get into, at some point, a situation where we have to talk about, rape being a two-way street, because, I can tell you, I know personally of, women who have bragged about getting a guy drunk to, basically to kind of loosen him up so that, sex could happen. When, I remember the story that, and I'm not going to say who the person was, but there's a fairly prominent journalist who, this woman was sort of dating, and she was frustrated that he wasn't making a move, and eventually she sort of got him really drunk.
And she was completely sober, and this was the plan, to get him drunk to get him to have sex with her?
I don't know if she was completely sober, but the plan was that if she got him drunk, he would eventually kind of lose his inhibitions and, enough that either he would make a move on her or, she would make a move on him and he would respond. Anyway,
well, if it's disgust.
By the way, the punchline, by the way, was that in attempting to do this, she eventually got him so drunk that he fell asleep. So,
so it didn't happen. So then it doesn't doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. If they were like consensually discussing this and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm nervous, or, I'm unable to do this because I can't get the courage to, and then they discuss, okay, well, maybe like if you get drunk and, loosen up.
The plan was unilaterally to get him drunk.
Without his knowledge that this is the plan.
Yeah, without his knowledge. Well, and of course, again, what does getting someone drunk means? If unless like she's actually slipping alcohol into his drink, he is consensually imbibing alcohol, So that's
I don't agree with that.
That we're getting into, and I know that we've already been talking for a while. And,
this is going to be like a 2-hour
to wrap things up. I just think that these are like enormously complicated issues, and especially when we're talking about young people who don't have a whole lot of experience like navigating the waters of.
But I think that we can do better in terms of education in that sense to help people navigate, right? And especially educate people about etiquette around sex when there's drinking involved and you're in college and things like that.
I absolutely agree. And I think that, part of the problem, I think, is that, you look at some of the stats about, the so-called hookup culture. It is, I don't want to be in the kind of Jordan Peterson position of saying, all casual sex is bad. But, the average man consumes something like 6 drinks, and I'm not really I guess, I'm not sure what quantity of alcohol is necessarily involved in each drink, but I guess what would be defined as, one drink, like either one beer or, one.
Well, also body mass makes a difference, right?
So, on average, the male partner in a hookup consumes 6 drinks and the woman consumes 5. So, they're both going into this really drunk. And
5 could have far more of an impact on her because of her body mass than than 6 would have on him.
They're both going into this. The point is that they're both going into this really drunk.
Right. So I think
that's a great situation for anyone. And, and I think that, I'm not really sure how to do this, but I would love to see a change in, the culture around this. Now, I do think that there's a kind of some of the education on, college campuses today about sexual assault basically takes what I think is a really kind of extreme position that if you are at all even slightly intoxicated, you are unable to give consent. And I think that's really counterproductive because, again, it doesn't kind of jibe with the experience of most people because people do see so much of this, drunk sex going around them. And what I would say, and I think this is what I would like to see happen, is that I think that we should find a way to talk about some of these things without using the language of rape or sexual assault. There should be a way to talk about, there are things you can do that can be hurtful to other people, that can be exploitative. I absolutely agree, for instance, that it is, morally wrong to pressure someone into sex that they don't want. I think it is, for instance, not only bad etiquette, but again, really bad ethics.
But it's, that can definitely be rape. You see that, right?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by pressure.
I think that maybe we are not we're not very aligned on the definition of rape. However, I do see some of what you're talking about. There are some efforts by some people, which I think are exaggerated. You, of course, disagree, and that's fine. But I also agree that we should be able to talk about these things and educate more people about them. And as the world changes around us, sexuality also changes and definitions do change. Like, for example, with the, invention of the internet and smartphones and sexting and, kids exchanging photos, teenagers exchanging photos. Everyone needs to be educated in a whole new way about sexuality a little bit. So some of the definitions just are changing. But thank you so much for chatting with me, Cathy. This was an interesting discussion, debate. We didn't agree on everything, but that's okay.
I think it's been great, and it's been really, really good talking to you.
Yeah, so everybody, if you want to follow Cathy, you can find her on Twitter at
Cathy Young 63.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, take care.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No E in mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no E in mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too. A special thanks to Dylan Beck for theme music, sound, and production help.